Stories are important in our lives. Think of all the stories that you have heard, stories that you are a part of. This morning we've heard stories that involve this congregation, this church, and it's quite amazing. I was thinking as things were being shared of what this little church, the impact that this little congregation has around the world, and that we can go out. And isn't it amazing also in Gravelbourg that the world comes to us? And we have a number of students. We're blessed with international students from countries like Burkina Faso and Burundi and DRC and other places like that, and Glenbane and all these foreign places. And they come with their stories. And some of you are great storytellers. And I'm not as good a storyteller, but sometimes when you sit down with people, they just can tell you a story. And that's actually an important part of our cultures in our world. Stories, collections of stories. They're passed on many times to succeeding generations. And those stories help us to navigate the mystery of what it means to be a human being on this earth. And all of us, I think, actually need stories, sometimes we think stories are just for children, but I think even as parents, even as grandparents, we need stories. Stories help us know who we are. They help us to know where we are and how we are to be who we are, where we are. And some think that one of the reasons that we in the West seem to be adrift in this day and age is that we don't, as a society, as a people, have a compelling story that we can tell each other, that we can pass on to the next generations. And we're all sitting with our individual stories, and we don't share in any one great story. And so we're not satisfied, as powerful as those stories might be. I say all that to say this, that there is one story that can bring us together, and it is a story that God himself has told, that God has told in the past to make sense of our world, and I think it can even make sense of our world here and now in the present. And God's story is actually found in this collection of 66 different books that we call the Bible. And the key to understanding is that the whole story of these 66 books tell the story actually begins in the first half of the Bible. Now, you may think when I said that first half of the Bible, you may be thinking Old Testament. But actually, I want to suggest to you this morning that the first half of the Bible is actually just the first 11 chapters of the very first book of the Bible, Genesis. That's the first half of the Bible. Long time ago, when the earth was green and there were still unicorns around, I took a class called Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. But day one, the professor said to us, this is how we're going to approach this class. We're covering the first 5 books of the Old Testament, but this is how the class is going to go. It's going to go like this. Genesis 1 to 11, 12 to 50, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And that's really was the pace of the class. We spent the vast majority of the class in those first 11 chapters of the Bible. And so the second half of the Bible, you can think of, actually starts with Genesis 12, when there's the call of Abraham and Sarah. And then it walks us through the history of the ancient people of Israel, takes us up to the coming of Jesus Christ. And finally, when we get to the end of the story, we're in Revelation and we're at the new heavens and the new earth. And the authors of the second half of the Bible are assuming that we know the first half. The second half builds on and only makes sense when you know the first half, Genesis 1 through 11. Genesis 1 through 11 is the story that makes sense of our stories. And so let's fix a spotlight there. Let's see if that's true. And let's start at the beginning of the story that makes sense of our story. So, very easy to find in your Bibles this morning. Turn to the very first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1. It's easy. And as we open our Bibles to the book of Genesis, it's important to understand the story that we're going to be reading. And even though the first chapter of Genesis has huge implications scientifically, it's important to understand this is not a scientific paper that we're reading this morning in Genesis 1. Although Genesis 1 has profound philosophical insights, this is not a philosophical dissertation that we're reading in Genesis 1. What we have in this opening chapter of the Bible is actually a poem. Or, if you're not into poems, what we have here in the opening chapter of Genesis is a song. And the first three notes of this song are very easy. They are C, C, and C. Creator creates creation. And if we can get those three notes right, we can sing the rest of the song in tune. Without those three notes, though, it's going to be impossible to make sense of our story, to make sense of our existence. And so the song begins. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Creator creates creation. Not just some power, not some process, or not something did something to cause the emergence of Mother Nature. However it all happens, and I'm not interested in the big explanation of how this all happens. Just remember the three notes. Creator creates creation. And millions of people are trying to sing the song of life, but they don't know these first three notes. And the first sentence of the story declares that the universe is not an accident, and you are not an accident. There is a creator. There is a person, one who is as personal as you and me. And the creator is someone who delights to create. And he created you, and he created everything around you. Notice how this hymn of creation begins and ends with this phrase, the heavens and the earth. You see it here in the opening verse of chapter 1. And then if you go to chapter 2, verse 1, you see it repeated again, the heavens and the earth. These are kind of like bookends here. This hymn of creation, this song begins and ends with the same phrase, the heavens and the earth. The heavens and the earth. That's what scholars call, or English majors call, a merism. It's a figure of speech that uses contrasting points to express totality. What does that mean? What it means is that the heavens and the earth are a way of saying the whole universe. The Creator creates everything that is. The universe did not just happen, and neither did you, neither did me. You know, we've talked this morning in the theme of the worship up to this point, and I very much appreciate it, is that we are to serve, we are to love our neighbor. And the foundation of that, the very foundation of that begins right here. Why do we love our neighbor? Why do we serve? Because we have all been created by God. All of us. Rich, poor, smart, not so smart. In the beginning, God created. Genesis 1 sings about how the Creator creates creation out of nothing. Sometimes they use the Latin phrase. Theologians like to, maybe it's like medicine too, they like to use the Latin phrasing. And so they talk about creation ex nihilo. It means creation out of nothing. In the Hebrew language, there are two main verbs that can be translated to suggesting creating. One of these verbs, asa, is most often translated to make. You take something that already exists and you make something else out of it. You take a lump of clay and you create something out of it. In the Old Testament, both humans and God can do that. They can make something. They can take something that already exists and make something else out of it. We asa. God also asas. And Scripture often refers to God as a potter, speaking of that lump of clay. But there's another verb that is used in the Hebrew language, and that is the verb bara. And that's the verb that is used in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God bara'ed, if I can butcher Hebrew and English together. And in the Old Testament, no human being ever baras. Only God can bara. That's because that verb emphasizes that something is being made that has never been before. In short, it is making something out of nothing. And in Genesis 1, we find that verb, bara, used in three key places. In verse 1, which we've looked at, God creates out of nothing, heavens and the earth. It's repeated again in verse 21. The living creatures, the animals, come into existence. They are bara'ed. And in verse 27, where human beings come into existence. At the time that Genesis 1 was composed, this song actually spoke a message that was very different from the messages in the surrounding world. There were all sorts of ideas, all sorts of stories floating around in ancient times of how everything came into being. A lot of them involved violence. A lot of them involved gods fighting and the world coming into existence kind of because the gods were lazy and they needed somebody to do their work for them. That's some of the stories. There were many others. And there's a lot of stories floating around today about why everything is the way it is. But Genesis 1 tells a different story, sings a different song. It says that when the Creator created the universe, there was nothing. And out of nothing, God created the heavens and the earth. And when the Creator creates living creatures, the animals, he does so out of nothing. And when the Creator created human beings, he did so out of nothing. And whatever else we believe about how human beings came into existence, Genesis 1 challenges us. It says you need to understand that human beings are bara'ed. They're made without analogy. They're an unprecedented work. We're created. You are bara'ed, and only God baras. No one else could have made you. No process, however creative, could have made you. And you are the unique work of the Creator who can bring life out of nothing. And again, going back to our theme of worship this morning, that's the foundation for why we serve. That's the foundation for why we care for one another, for everyone, because we are all unique creations of the Creator. We'll talk more about that next week. And the song continues. The Creator creates creation out of nothing, and amazingly, He creates it simply by speaking. He doesn't create by exerting energy against resistant forces. He doesn't create by wrestling with primordial powers, which were some of the stories floating around in that day. God creates His Word actually very peacefully, as you read through Genesis 1, simply speaking. Let there be, 7 times repeated, let there be light. Let there be a vault between the waters to separate water from water. Let the land produce vegetation. Let there be lights in the vault of the sky. Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds. 7 times, let there be. And then, an 8th time, let us make mankind, humanity, in our image. Creates, not but simply by speaking. And then when God comes to earth in the person of Jesus Christ, Jesus redeems, Jesus recreates, simply by speaking. And so He says to the paralyzed man, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And He says to another, be quiet. Come out of him, speaking to the demon. Or to Lazarus in the tomb, Lazarus, come out. The God who created only needs to speak to make things happen. And He is speaking all the time. He is still speaking. He is speaking into being new creations in Jesus Christ. So listen. Listen. The Creator creates creation in divine time. To put that another way, God acts according to His own timetable. And there is a structure I want to highlight to you in Genesis 1. It's sometimes called the 6+1 structure. So 6 days plus 1 equals 7. Yeah, I'm not a math major. That's amazing. But in the Bible, remember, the number 7 always is a symbolic number for completion, for perfection. And so the 7-day structure of Genesis is a way of saying God made the universe and everything in it within His time according to His schedule. And not only does the Creator create creation in divine time, the Creator also creates creation in a divine way. And so this song of creation in Genesis 1 sings about how the Creator brings form out of formlessness, fullness out of emptiness. And to kind of diagram this, let's look at it this way. Genesis 1, you can lay it out in kind of two rows here. Days 1 to 3 and days 4 to 6. In days 1 to 3, we go from formlessness to form, from chaos to order. In days 4 to 6, we move from things being empty to things being filled, from emptiness to fullness. And so another way to think of this is in days 1 to 3, God is building the house or the classroom. In days 4 to 6, God furnishes it. And so in day 1, God speaks light. The fundamental energy of life comes into existence. In day 2, God calls forth the sky to separate the waters. In day 3, God calls forth dry land and gathers the waters around it, and God empowers the land to produce vegetation, the support system for life that is yet to emerge. But take careful note of what happens next. In day 4, God goes back, so to speak, to the work of day 1, where he created light, and he calls forth lights that use the existing light. He's filling, he's furnishing. And God creates the cosmic system, in essence. And also note that, just as an aside, that the song in Genesis 1 doesn't call the sun, doesn't refer to the moon as the moon, just calls them the greater light and the lesser light. I'm looking at verse 16. The greater light and the lesser light. Why that? Because the song is rebuffing ancient astrologers who would make the sun and the moon into gods. And the sun, this song says, is not a god. It's a magnificent light spoken into being by the Creator. In day 5, God continues furnishing the house. He goes back to the work of day 2, and he calls forth fish to live in the waters, birds to live in the sky. And he also gives living creatures the capacity, and then in day 6, he goes back to the work of day 3, where dry land, vegetation. Now he's furnishing, he's filling, and he brings forth living creatures to live on the earth and humans. And God also gives the living creatures the capacity to reproduce, and he blesses humans to be fruitful and multiply. So he builds the house, days 1 to 3, days 4 to 6, he's furnishing. The emphasis in Genesis 1 is not these 6 days of creation. I've no doubt that if God could very well have done creation in 6 days. All I'm saying is that's not the emphasis of this song. This song is emphasizing the building of the house and the furnishing. Formlessness to form, emptiness to fullness. And however long it took, or however long it takes, the Creator seeks always, even in our day, to move things from chaos to order, from emptiness to fullness. The God who creates is at work, bringing order out of the mess and fullness out of the emptiness of our lives even. The song about the Creator creates creation out of nothing, creates by speaking, creates in divine time and in his own time. And it sings about how The Creator creates a creation that is good. 7 times in this song, there's the refrain, the chorus, if you want. It was good. It was good. Doesn't always feel that way now. And Genesis 2 through 11 will explain why that is the case. But notice that on day 6, when God surveys everything that he's made, he pronounces it very good. When the creature that God calls man and woman are created, God says, very good, rather than just good. The Creator creates a creature in his own image, his own likeness. The Creator creates a creation who, the intention is, will be a model, will show the rest of creation who the Creator is and what he is like. That's part of what it means to be human. We'll talk more about that next Sunday. Fascinatingly, all the stories that we tell and all the great stories and the myths of all cultures are kind of grappling with the questions that come up in the first half of the Bible, Genesis 1 through 11. And these chapters, Genesis 1 through 11, I hope you will come to see make sense of all of our other stories, because they speak to those basic questions that people are asking all the time. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What are we? What does it mean to be human? And Genesis 1 says, you are Bara'ed, and only God baraz. You are the unique work of the Creator who can bring life out of nothing. And the God who made us need only speak to make things happen. And he is speaking all the time. And the God who creates is at work bringing order out of the mess and the fullness, out of the emptiness of our world and our lives. And if you listen to it, the song in Genesis 1 sings about how the universe is not an accident. You're not an accident. There is a Creator, a person, who is as personal as you and me. And he delights to create, and he created you and everything around you.